I've been asked to share a conversation with you on leadership. I will, of course, do as I've been invited to. But before I do, 48 hours' time, we will commemorate Remembrance Day. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about sacrifice. Just over 100 years ago, 16,000 Australian and New Zealand soldiers surged across the shore towards the rugged cliffs of the Dardanelles in Gallipoli. 8,000 of them died. Worse was to come in the grim stalemate that formed on the Western Front. We had 250,000 of our citizens who fought on the Western Front. 40,000 of them perished. Those Anzacs fought, suffered and endured for something. And the men and women that have come after them and fought for our country in different places at different times, they fought and they died for the same thing. And that thing was you. It was us, the people of Australia. They gave freely of themselves so their families, their mates and their mates' families could live in a country that was free and fair. And we do, I believe, live in a country that is free and fair as any there is. And that is our plain good luck. And we should make something of that. Whether we make or we mar this great opportunity that has been left to us is up to us. In our towns and cities, big and small, there are memorials to our fallen. But there's another memorial that I believe is just as important. The memorial that our fallen would wish for. It's how we live our lives. I like to think that they're able to look down on us and say, we did not die in vain. Our sons and daughters have made a great thing of the land and the freedom that we kept for them. Can I now attend to my duty, which is to talk a little about leadership? I don't know about you all, I've enjoyed a little bit of success, but I've also endured plenty of failure. And the funny thing is, I learn a whole lot more from the things I got wrong than anything I might have got right. So I want to offer you 6 thoughts on leadership based primarily on the things I got wrong. My first thought, as a leader, you constantly need to be asking yourself, what is it we are trying to achieve? And you need to be able to answer that in a simple and compelling way. That's not easy. It takes time, intellect, and focus. But good leaders are good simplifiers. They can cut through doubt and debate to provide an answer to that question that everyone can understand. I served in the Iraq War with the Americans, and we got this responsibility wrong. We thought we knew what we were trying to achieve. We certainly got asked often enough from the visiting American politicians, and we would say we were trying to achieve 3 things. Protect the political process. There was going to be a referendum on their constitution and a national election that year, the year I was there. We would say that we were improving security so that normalcy could return for the citizens of Iraq, and that we were building up the capability of the Iraqi army and police so we could hand over security responsibility to them. But there was a problem with those three tasks. They were just that. They were tasks. And though it was less clear at the time, we confused the how of our business, which was the tasks, with what we were trying to achieve. A lot of good soldiers and a lot of innocent people lost their lives in the year that I was in Iraq, whilst we meandered in search of an objective that we'd never identified. What would have been the right objective? Defeat the insurgency. The leader's responsibility: always know what you are trying to achieve and be able to explain it in a simple and compelling way. Break. Second thought. As a leader, you will need courage. Now, I'm not talking here about physical courage. I presume it's not all that important for most of you. As a soldier it is, but I've also found in Australia that courage is in plentiful supply. The courage I'm talking about is harder, it is rarer, and it's more important. Moral courage. The courage to say and do what you believe to be right, regardless of the fact that you might cop several different kinds of hell for saying or doing it. The courage that takes you down the path of the harder right and keeps you away from the path of the easier wrong. The courage, sometimes, to stand alone. One of my jobs in the Iraq War was to prepare the target packages for the big US general running the whole war. I was his operations guy. One day we got a request to approve an air attack, on a gathering of 50 insurgents who were hiding in a school. But the estimated innocent civilian casualties from that attack was 27 or more, which was high. Now, the American commander of the famous 18th Airborne Corps had endorsed the attack, but the number of civilian casualties exceeded his authority, so it had to come to the big boss, my boss. Well, the thought of taking out 50 of our opponents in one strike, that's very appealing, but not at any cost. And I thought the price was too high. And so I got back to the 18th Airborne Corps and I said, I'm not going to put my name to this. And I'm going to say the big boss, he shouldn't put his name to it either. Well, the commander of the 18th Airborne Corps was a busy guy. He had 250,000 fighters under his command. It was hard to get his attention, but I sure got his attention that day. And he said to me with memorable directness, these insurgents have been killing our people, US Marines. They have been visiting unspeakable atrocities on the civilian population in that area. Had I forgotten we were fighting a war, he asked. The pressure to accept risk to your own side whilst trying to protect innocent civilians is incommunicable. But I stuck with my judgment. Fortunately, the big boss agreed, and that attack didn't proceed. We got him another way about a week later. Do you know, moral courage doesn't come in the big moments in life. More usually it comes in the smaller moments. It might be in your workplace, and you see someone who's a bit of a bully, and you see him doing it again. And you say to yourself, oh, I don't want to make a fuss. Or you say, next time that happens, I'm going to do something about that. Or even worse, you say, I'm going to speak to the boss, let the boss deal with it. Well, each time we fail to address the issue before us, our moral courage drips away. And it comes harder next time when you've got to deal with something. But each time we gird our loins and we deal with the issue, our moral courage grows. And if we go about the right way, and that's often the hardest thing, I get that, you can lift the respect that your team have in you as a leader. Leader's responsibility: practice moral courage at home, in communities, sporting teams, in your workplace, and create the conditions so that those who are less experienced and less powerful than you, they feel safe to do the same thing. Right, next thought. I've, like many of you, I guess, I've worked in a lot of teams. Most of them are good enough. A couple of bad ones. But I've only ever worked in 2 great teams. And the thing that made those teams great, that none of the other teams had, was humility. Organisational humility. Now, humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking about yourself less often and about others, the team, more. Does it mean you're unsure or you lack confidence? Quite the contrary. It means you're totally secure as a human being and not at all threatened by the views, the opinions of others from wherever they might come. You use those as an opportunity to grow. So I got this wrong when I was a really young officer. I was about 21 or 22, newly commissioned. I was leading a patrol of soldiers on a military skills exercise in outback New South Wales. Amongst other things, I was responsible for the safe navigation of that foot patrol. There were about 25 of us in it. Now, this was before GPS. So we had a paper map, a pencil, and an interesting compass. But you know, the more we penetrated through that bush, the more those sort of gently rolling hills and those gum trees, they all looked the same to me. Sensing that I might not know where I was, the second in command, a sergeant, much more experienced soldier than I, came up from the rear, probably a couple of hundred metres away, and he stopped me and he said exactly these words. He said, "Skipper, are you comfortable that you know where we are? Can I help you?" My response, "I'm fine, Sergeant. I know exactly where we are, and I know you're busy, and I wouldn't want to take you from your work back in the rear there." Well, we're supposed to be back in our firm base by last light that night. We never made it. The soldiers that I was responsible for were kept away from shelter, which, as it turned out, would have been handy that night, adequate food, and more importantly, adequate water until late in the afternoon or the following day. All because of my pride. I learned a hard lesson, but the price was paid by the team. I learned that pride is about who is right, humility is about what is right. Leaders' responsibility: understand the role that humility plays in great teams, and we all set the tone. Break. Next thought. Leaders deal in hope, not hype, which is an entirely different thing, but hope, something that is real, positive, and within reach. It's easy to lead when everything's looking up and going to plan. It gets pretty hard pretty quick when it's not going to plan, and the doubters emerge and the critics build. I deployed to East Timor, actually flew out of Darwin here in 1999. When we first went in with General Cosgrove, I was one of his commanding officers. A lot of great things about East Timor, but the quality of the road system there then, well, that wasn't one of them. And that was a problem for us. We'd moved from securing the capital Dili to the border with Indonesia. And we needed to be able to move our rapid response force, which was an armoured capability, anywhere, anytime, day or night, regardless of weather. And we couldn't do that. I was given the task of fixing that problem. There are a few simple things we could do, which we did, but there was a river that, when it wasn't raining, our armoured vehicles could ford across, no problems. But when it did rain, which it often did there, it was impassable. The only solution was to build a bridge. So I gave that responsibility to one of our sub-organisations. After they'd been at the task for about 3 weeks, I went up in the hills to see them. And I got a briefing from a very grumpy officer who was running the task. He said to me, well, as you can see, it's steep, vegetation is thick, it's rocky, soldiers are having trouble keeping their footing, injuries mounting up. True. And you, he said, pointing to me, you haven't been able to keep sufficient rations up to us, which is also true. Weight loss was a serious issue, and there was disease about. There was malaria and dengue settling in. When you looked at the soldiers, the colour of their skin was exactly the same colour as the uniforms, which was exactly the same colour as the dirt that they'd been working in for those weeks. There's no showers there, right? Long faces all around, progress very slow. And I remember thinking, for God's sake, say something positive. Leaders deal in hope. So I said, well, thank you, Glenn. It could be worse. And he said to me, grumpily, how? Now, I wasn't expecting that. And I said, well, could be raining. And you know what? About half hour later, it rained. And what we didn't know at the time, it rained for nearly 24 hours straight, or was to. But after a couple of hours, we were all soaked. There's no shelter either. It gave us a bit of a chance to have a wash. And there was only one thing we could do: laugh. And that gave me an opportunity to remind them that the thousands of mates in that fighting organisation were relying on them to get this job done. That they were the only ones who had the skills to do it. And they'd never been licked on a task before. They lifted, they got that job done. The book has been written about their exploits, including that bridge. I was proud of them then, and I have the same sense of pride all these years later. The leader's responsibility: keep hope alive when there's plenty of reasons to give up. Ride those waves. Break. Fifth thought. Never let your humanity be dominated by process or policy or protocol. I got this wrong. I was running an organisation of about 400 soldiers up in Townsville. We had a private soldier in the regiment who was married. He had 4 children. So he didn't have a lot of money. He was the only living relative of his sister, who had an illness that was going to kill her prematurely. She lived in a home just outside of Adelaide in South Australia. He would save his pennies up each year so that hopefully once a year he could afford a trip from Townsville to Adelaide to go and visit his sister. One day, he got a message which said his sister had taken an unexpected turn for the worse and she would probably die before the end of the week. Now, he happened to be in East Timor when the message came through. And he knew that logistically we could not get him from deepest, darkest East Timor, where he was, to Adelaide before the end of the week. And just for this moment, he'd been saving up an entitlement that the Army gives to soldiers, which is compassionate leave travel. If your nominated next of kin is in a crisis, the Army, because we take people away from their families, will pay for you to go and visit them. So he asked that that entitlement be transferred to his wife, who could easily get from Townsville to Adelaide in a day, to be with his sister, to hold her hand while she died. That was his request. So what did I do? I looked at it and I thought, oh dear, I'm not sure about that. So I gave it to the chief admin person and said, hey, can you all check the policy? Am I allowed to delegate? The answer came back, no, you can't. So we told the soldier. And the soldier came back very quickly. He said, whoa, he said, hang on. He said, what part of this deal isn't working for you? He said, I'm asking you to help my family, and it's going to cost you less money, you the Army, less money to get my wife from Townsville than it would to get me from East Timor. And oh, by the way, if I went, you'd be giving me 7 days paid leave. I'm actually going to stay here and keep working. So help me explain what's wrong with that from your perspective. I thought, well, yeah, so let me have a think about that. So while I was thinking about it, his sister died. And she died alone. And I wish I could have that time over again. Leaders' responsibility, know your policies and your protocols, but if the decision is going to affect a human, overlay your humanity and then make the decision. That will involve taking some risk. Welcome to leadership. Right? Last thought. Look after yourself in leadership, emotionally, physically, and intellectually. Come as no surprise from me as a soldier that physical fitness is important. A lot of soldiers think it's about building up certain body parts. That's all it's about. It's about building mental toughness. It's about taking people to places they might not think they otherwise could go. I find that the fitter I am, the more able I'm able to deal with the slings and arrows and the stress of daily challenges and a busy working life. Sleep deprivation, long-term fatigue, is one of those things that compromises sensible decision making. And the thing I've learned about sleep is it's personal. Some people get by with 5 or 6 hours a night and that's all they need. Terrific, take 5 or 6 hours a night. But most people I've come across need about 8 or 9 hours. If you need that, that's what you should take. I read every night. Biographies, history, philosophy. Helps me settle down. I usually don't get more than half a dozen pages in before I nod off. And I always learn something. And it's remarkable how many times I've come across stuff and I go, really? They had that problem 273 years ago? And they sorted it out? Okay, I can do this. Don't always go at breakneck pace when you're in leadership. When you've earned leave, take it, spend time with your families. Take your work seriously, but not yourself. And my wife helps me with this one. So all those years ago, I got a phone call, it was unexpected, from Canberra to say, congratulations, son, we're going to make you a general. So when the phone call finished, I remembered that a few weeks before, someone had said to me that more Australians had been federal cabinet ministers than had been generals in our army. So it was with some pride and hubris that I went home to tell my wife. So I told her. She was in the kitchen. And she looked up at me and she said, Stephen, she said, that's very interesting. She said, but as you can see, I'm getting dinner ready. Now there's some vegetables there. Any chance to make yourself useful and cut them up for me? That was a good reminder. A reminder I needed. Not take myself too seriously. Having said you need to look after yourself, can I put that in context? There is no greater privilege in a working life than to be invited to lead your fellow citizens. And I found this priority work best. First every time, came the needs of my mission and my country. Second, came the needs, the safety, the comfort and the welfare of those whom I had the good fortune to lead. And last every time, my own needs, my own safety and my own comfort. And you all don't want to muck up that priority. Can I leave you with this? At the end of the week, see if you can't find some quiet time and ask yourself this question. If a film was made of my efforts this week and I watched it, would I be comfortable with the character that I played? And would others who saw it deem me worthy to hold the position of leadership that I do? That's it. I'm out of ammunition. Thank you.
Do some questions here. Thank you, Stephen. A wonderful address, and now I'm going to let you face the firing line again with questions if there are any out there. So I'd call for questions. There'll be some roving mics, I think. Don't tell me you're going to get away with it this easily, Stephen. How are we going? I can't see you for light, but yes, right down in the front here. If there's coming behind you, there's a mic.
Sorry? I'm good. Okay. Thank you, Stephen. That was great. I'm asking this question because I think I'm the only one who's going to ask a question. And it was probably one I was going to ask you when you were on your own. But I wondered if you knew Brigadier Eamon Lanigan.
What was the surname again?
Lanigan. I'm getting that's a no.
It's a small army, and yet it's a big army.
Yeah, right.
And I don't believe I do.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for you asking.
Yeah, that's right. So he's my first cousin, and he's done a lot of. He's in infantry, so he's done a lot of service in Afghanistan, Iraq, East Timor, what have you. And many of the lessons or thoughts that you had today, Eamon echoes himself. So I think, and once again, through his errors, rather than the things that have gone really well. And he's a very humble kind of guy for a career army man, a very successful one. And I think that's a very important message that you relayed, is that the truly confident don't need to tell you how great they are. Yeah. So I just want to reiterate that. And I think if you've ever met any F-18 fighter pilots, they're very much the same too. You know, with big responsibilities, they're actually, you know, quite quiet and self-contained and confident in their abilities.
They are. I have one as a son-in-law. Thank you.
There's a question at the rear there.
Sorry, Ben Maiden. Thank you very much, Stephen. I just want to go back actually to your first thought, where you said be clear on what you're trying to achieve. But did you have any words on how you might know whether you've got the right objective or not?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of the question.
Yeah, sorry. I just wondered, you said that you thought you didn't have the right objective. Yes. How do you know that at the time?
Well, we didn't, and that was the problem. We thought we did. And I guess the lesson I learned was that it's actually sometimes pretty hard to know what it is you're trying to achieve. It's easy to rest at the 2 or 3 or 4 levels below what you're actually trying to do. Can I tell a very brief story about this? So not a military story, but I attended a presentation with a guy called Mark Bouris. Now, I don't know if any of you know him. I didn't know him by name, but as soon as I saw him, I recognised him. He's a guy who used to front Wizard Home Loans. He was on TV with Australia's Apprentice, and he's also fronts Yellow Brick Road or something like that. What he said to us was, hey, you all think I'm a TV person or a business person. He said, I'm not. He said, I am an academic. He had 2 PhDs in economics, and he's working on one of them in the late 80s in Sydney. And he came up with this idea that he thought would be good for a home loan business. But he was a poor academic, he had no money to set up a business. But he knew a rich family in Australia, the Packer family. So he got an interview with Mr. Kerry Packer. Packer liked his idea, gave him to his staff to work with for about 6 months. Then Mark Bouris got a phone call from Packer's office. Mr. Packer would like to meet with you at this time and this date to sign a contract. He was very happy. So he turned up on time, and he said there he sat in the reception area for 2 hours. Mr. Packer was out for a long lunch. And when Packer returned, Mark Bouris, quite a small guy. I personally didn't meet Mr. Kerry Packer. I understand he's a giant fella. Packer apparently looked at Bouris, pointed to him and said, Bouris, follow me. So he got up, and he said he could hardly keep up with him. And he ended up in this great big office. Packer sat down, didn't say anything to Bouris, took his shoes off, and then put his besocked feet on the desk and looked at Bouris like this. Bouris was uncomfortable. He said, do you mind if I sit down? Packer said, sure. And Bouris said the chair was about this high off the ground. So now he's looking up at Packer like this. Packer lit a cigarette, didn't say anything for a while. And Bouris didn't feel he should break the silence. Eventually Packer said, son, tell me what business you're in. And Bouris was disappointed. He said, he thought he was there to sign a contract. This guy's forgotten, doesn't even know what the business is anymore. And I don't think I had a lot of time to explain it to him. And before he was able to respond, Packer said, and don't tell me it's the home loan business. Bouris was crestfallen. He thought, okay, wasted 6 months. And then Packer spoke again and said, because you are not in the home loan business, son. You are in the business of hopes and dreams. Everything you say and do, all your marketing, your commercial activity needs to be centred around that. Do you understand? Bouris was a smart man. Yeah, I do. Packer said, good. Pulled the contract from the other side of his desk and signed it. And that was the start of Wizard Home Loans. So it's not always easy to know what it is you're trying to achieve, but spending effort on it is worth it.
Thanks, Steve. More questions?